Hey everyone, I thought we could have a little book chat this afternoon. It's a quiet Sunday afternoon. I'm about to go downstairs and get ready for dinner with my family. We're having chili on a nice cool day, maybe do a bonfire tonight. So, about to do that, but I thought we'd have a little book chat and talk about what I've been reading lately. I don't really have anyone to talk to about books I'm reading. I love to read, and I guess I don't really have anyone in my life right now who likes to read like I do or who reads the books that I read. So maybe I'll find someone on YouTube who does. Just so you know, let me give you a little idea about my reading preferences so that you'll know whether or not you care to hear the rest of this video. I read all manner of genre. I read all kinds of things from mystery, science fiction, fantasy. I love a lot of nonfiction, like books about entrepreneurship and self-development, education, and memoirs and all that. But for my light reading, which is what I do a lot of, I prefer to read Christian fiction. Really anything that's going to take me from the challenges of the moment, as a form of escapism. And so for me, the books that take me out of like current life are light romances, usually Christian historical fiction. Where it's Christian is that it comes from a Christian worldview, where the characters, usually the plot line or the decisions of the characters are affected by the author, by the protagonist's faith in God. And so, and a lot of times Christian themes are explored and all, which I like exploring themes through fiction, Christian or otherwise. So I like those, and I also like mysteries. Like one of my favorite books, one of my favorite authors is coming out with a book this next month, which I'm excited about, Louise Penny. She writes the Inspector Gamache series, which is set in Canada. I just love that series, so I'm excited about reading that. And that's not Christian fiction, that's just fictions, mysteries, detective type book. So, and then when it comes to nonfiction, I love a lot of entrepreneurship type business books, personal development, education, memoirs. Sometimes I'll read that kind of thing. And when it comes to my fiction, I like to read it usually on Kindle, and my nonfiction, I usually listen to it on the ebook on Audible. So anyway, those are my reading preferences. Now let me just dive into what I've read recently. Let's start off with books I've read on Kindle. These are fiction. Two of them are Christian fiction. One is kind of more of a contemporary non-Christian fiction book. So the first one is called Crossed Lines by Jennifer Delamere. It's part of the Love Along the Wire series, and it's the second book in that series. So these books, I would say they're Christian fiction, but I'd say they're light-hearted historical romances with a serious side to them. They are set in what I think is Victorian England and London, and it's about these three friends, these three young women. They're like in their 20s, or maybe one of them's in their early 30s. And they're all single and working as telegraph operators, and they're single, and so they're living in this boarding house together, or at least at the beginning of the series. And so there's this overriding theme in this series about women in the workforce at that time, the challenges that they faced, their decisions for working as telegraph operators, and the conflict between being a woman and being in the workforce back then. So that's interesting to me. We don't know how good we have it now. People complain a lot about a lot of things, but things were very different back then. There were limited options for women if they didn't get married right away, like what we consider to be very young right now. They didn't. They're in their 20s and unmarried, and if they didn't have a family to live with, they needed to work, and there were limited options. And so it wasn't about following your passion. It was about just getting a job and trying to find a safe place to live. So those are like overriding themes throughout the books to this series. Another overriding theme is about the dangers of manipulating other people, even if you think it's innocent. And in these books, it's kind of manipulation to gain a romantic partner. So I know that sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? But anyway, this book in particular is about the young woman. She's an orphan, and she's working as a telegraph operator, but she really very much wants to get married. So that's different than the first book in the series, because in the first book in the series, was a young woman who had a job, who had a family, and who wanted a family who wanted her to be with them, but she very much wanted a career. She didn't want. She wanted something different in life than a lot of women back then. She wanted a career. She wanted to make her own decisions. She wanted to make her own money. And back then, you kind of had to choose between a career and a family and marriage. And so she chose career all the way. But of course, she meets a young man who respects her, who treats her with respect. They have an intellectual connection, which I enjoyed. And because of that intellectual connection, she starts feeling the feelings. And so she didn't know what to do about that, because she'd never considered marriage and didn't know what to do, how to feel about this, or even how to attract him. And wasn't even sure if she wanted to attract him. And so she starts reading this book that she came across, which talks to young women about how to attract a man, how to get a man. And so despite herself, she starts looking at it and hates herself for it, but takes some of the advice. And of course, it's manipulation tactics and kind of that outcome of all that. So, it's a lighthearted romance, and they're going to get together at the end. And what you're really reading about is the journey. So that was the first book. And this book that I read recently, this is a young woman who is an orphan, doesn't have family, and she very much wants one. She wants her own family. She wants to be married and with kids. She wants her own garden. She loves gardening so much. That's her favorite thing to do in the world, is to just be out in nature and garden. She wants to design her own garden and does it even her free time. And so that's what she wants, but there's not a man in sight. And so she works as a telegraph operator, hoping to maybe meet men that way, but that job is kind of like soul destroying for her, because she's inside all day doing this office clerical job, and she really just wants to be outside talking to her plants. And so she does eventually meet a couple of guys. Romance blossoms with one of them, and so we get into that whole manipulation techniques again. And then this book has probably my least favorite thing about this book. Has this trope in it, this Cyrano de Bergerac type Roxanne type trope. If you've seen Roxanne or Cyrano de Bergerac, you know what I'm talking about. And I just hate that trope. It's because it's manipulation, but it's like, who does that? Like, it's so manipulative and disrespectful of another person. And if you really care about somebody, why would you do that? And so I really kind of hated that aspect of the book, but I kept with it. Another theme in this particular book was this idea is explored about what do you do when tragic events happen, when there's tragic circumstances in your life, and what do you do with it? How does that affect your personality, your character, your future? How can you come out of it in a better way? Resisting the temptation to sink into bitterness and to form your personality and your character in a negative way. And so that was interesting to read. But you may have picked up, I've mentioned several themes already having to do with this particular book and the series as a whole, and that was one of my issues with the book. And with the series, it's like there's just too much going on. There's too much going on. Besides that trope that I don't like, your mind can't really rest on one idea. And I've seen this done really well, an idea explored through fiction, like Tana French, who writes mysteries. She's one of my favorite writers, and all of her books have some overarching theme, kind of a message or idea that's explored through the points of view of different characters in the book. And it's not an in-your-face type of exploration of that idea, but it's there if you look for it, and it's very interesting and well done. But these books have several ideas that are being explored through lots of different people, and so I just feel like there's a little too much going on. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was fine. I read it, and I'm interested in reading the third book in the series because of the character that it's going to be around, about a young, like the third friend, who her ideas of marriage are different because she's a young widow and apparently her husband treated her badly. And so she has a very negative view of marriage and maybe men in general. I don't know. I mean, I'll find out when I read the book. So I am interested to see what the author does with that character, but probably after I read that book, I'm not going to continue reading the author unless it's really different, unless um, this next book kind of calms down a little in the themes department. You know what I mean? Okay, so all right, moving on to the next book. This one I really enjoyed. So like this last book, I'd give it like 3 out of 5 stars. This next book, I'm going to give a solid 4.5 stars. It's to Disguise the Truth by Jen Torino, probably slaughtering her name, but I love her as an author because she writes Christian fiction as well, but it's lighthearted and historical, but it's humorous. Like there's this humorous element to all of her books, and so they're all kind of campy. They're not like, it's not realistic, but it's not supposed to be. You're not supposed to take them too seriously. I mean, there's some serious themes that are explored lightly, but they're for fun, and you know that, and so they're fun to read. This is part of a series called the Bleecker Street Inquiry Agency, and it's the third book in the series, and it's about the head of this inquiry agency. So this is a detective agency set in, I think, 1800s New York City, and it's owned and run by a group of women. And so each of the books in the series is about like a romance about one of the women, and then some side romances from side characters. And so this detective agency, they mostly serve women, especially poor women. And so the kind of the serious issue that's addressed lightly in these books is the limited choices women had back then to get help in certain areas, and being believed or being taken advantage of, and the lack of power women really had back then. And so that's very serious, but the books still maintain their kind of lighthearted feel, which I appreciate. All right, so the theme of this book is the danger of first impressions. That's how I would sum it up. And I was looking forward to reading it because it's about the head of this agency, who we've seen in the previous books, and she's very mysterious. She says she's a widow. She's in widow's weeds all the time, wears heavy veils, and hides her face from most everybody. But then when she removes the veil, she's a very beautiful young woman, and you just kind of wonder what's going on with this lady. And so this book, you find out what's going on with her and her backstory and all that, when this guy shows up at the inquiry agency wanting to hire them. So it's already unusual that a guy is showing up, because they serve mostly women and women who don't have anywhere else to go for help. And here's this rich guy showing up. And he's looking for a missing heiress. And you might guess who that missing heiress is. So besides it being a lighthearted historical romance, it's also got this mystery that needs to be solved. And it's a lot of fun to read. I really enjoyed it. So 4.5 stars for this book and the series in general. All right, the last fiction book I'll talk about is The Words We Whisper by Mary Ellen Taylor. This is not Christian fiction. Excuse me. It's a contemporary / historical fiction book. And it's both of those things, because it's one of these books that jumps timelines. You go back and forth between 2 timelines, which sounds kind of confusing, but it works. Yeah, she makes it work. The 2 timelines that are being jumped between are a contemporary timeline involving this hospice nurse in the United States who goes home to her grandmother, who helped raise her sick grandmother, and her grandmother wants her to clean out the attic, which was kind of a weird thing, but she's like, fine, that's what you want, that's what I'll do. So that's one timeline. The other timeline is Italy, I think Rome, during World War II. Very different situation. And there's a connection between the timelines. You're trying to figure out what that connection is through the whole book. That's kind of the fun one of the fun aspects about it, where at the end you're just like, tell me I read it, what's the connection? So there's this connection between the two timelines that you're trying to figure out. And normally I don't like World War II fiction because I lived in Germany as a kid. My father was in the Air Force. We were stationed at Ramstein Air Force Base, and during the 80s, during the Cold War, and I was there. I visited a concentration camp, Dachau, and that was, as a very sensitive child, that was a lot for me, because I lived there from the time I was like 9 through like about to turn 13, and so I still have a lot of feelings about that. You know, a lot of people like World War II romances. I don't, because World War II was like real, and a lot of terrible things happened, and I can't get into a romantic frame of mind when I think about World War II, because that's not what it was. And I think it's disrespectful of everything that happened then, the people who went through horrible things and lost loved ones, you know, both in concentration camps and the families of soldiers and just the families of the people who were targeted. Just, it was terrible. So I'm not interested in reading a lot of books about romance or World War II. Just not interested. But this isn't that. There is a romance element to it, but it's not like the major thing in the book. I think more the theme of this book are, there's the idea that's explored about death and dying, maybe dying well, or how, you know, just the impact of death on a family. And then there's the theme of what war does to the individual. You know, we think of war as between two nations, but really it's about the humanity of it, the individuals involved, their families, people who are targeted, like the impact of war on the individual, where they're not caring about what's going on between the two nations. They just know that they're suffering, their loved ones are suffering. And so that's what's being explored now. In this day and age, that really kind of hit home for me. So I found it to be a really good book. It had a very satisfying ending, and I was glad I enjoyed it, because I read another book that she wrote called The Brighter the Light, and it was a similar type thing where it jumps back and forth between two timelines, different timelines, contemporary, and then this other one, or actually a couple of other ones. And when I started reading this book, I'm like, she's doing that again? She's gonna work, and both times it worked really well. Both books were really well done. So I do recommend them. I would give them maybe like 4 out of 5 stars. I like how she made the jump between timelines work, and also both of those books had also this element about like family mysteries, which made me wonder about the author. I'm like, did she have some big family mystery in her life? And so, but it was really well done. I will warn you that this isn't like the Christian fiction, which is closed or very innocent, like your kids probably read those books. No, this is, I wouldn't say it's open door, but it's not closed door. It's definitely not a locked door. Like, it's like the door's cracked open when it comes to the bedroom door. You know, it's cracked open. So I don't know that I'd give it to like a teenager to read, but you know, I guess it just depends on you, what you like. Or, you know, if you're offended by that, you probably won't want to pick it up. But if you're not, I thought it was interesting. All right, so now I'll talk about a book I'm currently reading. It's a nonfiction book. I'm listening to it on Audible, but I also got the ebook version so I could kind of highlight things and take notes and stuff. And it's the book I'm reading is called Consider This: Charlotte Mason and the Classical Tradition by Karen Glass. So you may guess that this book about Charlotte Mason and kind of the genesis of the educational philosophy that she came up with, and how it was influenced by the classical tradition. So it's not a how-to book. It's not how to be a Charlotte Mason homeschooler. It's a book that kind of explains her writings, and then the background of like what was going on at that time, you know, why she said certain things, where if I were just reading her writings, I wouldn't get it. It wouldn't have its full impact on me. But then it kind of tells you the background of how education was viewed at that time and in the past, and why she said certain things. And so I'm only a few chapters into it. That's been interesting so far. I picked it up because I did want to learn more about it. I'm not interested in becoming a Charlotte Mason homeschooler. I'm not interested in any one particular way of homeschooling. because I homeschool for my kids and for my family, because I want to customize my kids' educations to fit their needs and preferences individually, and then also the needs and preferences of our family as a whole. That's my purpose for homeschool. And so I'm not going to stick with just one way of doing things, and especially since I like more modern methods of homeschooling. I use modern tools and very much want to look at like the world we live in right now that my kids are going to live in, as they grow older. And I'm not into, and I'm like, I prefer minimal fuss. Like, I don't want a whole lot of tools. I don't want to do a lot of crafts and that kind of thing. I just kind of want to get it done. But I thought, hey, let me see what this is about, and more about the woman herself, and why she came up with her way of doing things. And so far I found it really interesting that she was looking at the way kids were educated then, that she was taught to teach her students. She wasn't a mother, she was a teacher. Like, she taught other people's kids, and how it wasn't really working. She didn't see that it had the impact that she wanted it to have, that things weren't working quite right. And so she was looking at what was done in the past, not to adopt it and do those things, but to see why. And that's why she came up with her way of doing things. And I really appreciate that, because isn't that what so many of us do as homeschoolers? We're trying to think of, okay, let's see what other people do, but I don't want to just do what they're doing. I want to see why they're doing it and see if that works for my family. But I did find it ironic that that's how she approached things, from what I've read so far. But how many homeschoolers now, and especially Charlotte Mason homeschoolers, are just adopting her methods and not looking into the why of it? I just kind of wonder about that. And so it's interesting to read. I'll see as I continue with it what comes of that. I am also keeping in mind that she was approaching education as a professional teacher and not as a mother. And while I'm sure she came to love her students, many of her students, it's not the same as mothering them. And so that's one of the reasons I've always been kind of like, about Charlotte Mason stuff, because I'm my kid's mother. My kids can have many teachers, but they have like the one mom. And so I always want to be their mom, their mother, and look at their lives holistically, like all the aspects of their life, their past, present, future, and not just the education part of their lives or the character training part of their lives, but like all of it. And so anyway, those are my thoughts so far. Well, I'm interested to see where this book goes. So let me know, what are you reading now, and is there anything that you recommend for me to read? I'm interested in making a list of books to read for when I'm looking for something to read, and the things I have on my current list, if I'm not feeling it right then, I want more options. So tell me what you would recommend for me to read and what you are currently reading. And I will talk to you in the next video, and I'll talk to you down in the comments as well. So I'll see you there.